Now, stigma comes in two definitions. It could be dishonor or disgrace. And a person goes through two characteristics when being stigmatized. It is, first of all, shame and guilt. The shame comes from the internal perception about the person going through that process, and the guilt is the external perception about people in what the person is also going through. So the question about stigma normally comes about with the question, how are you? So the reaction to how are you is the stigma, because you are very relatable to me saying, I'm not feeling fine, I have a headache. It's a good excuse to go home, to get a day off. But if I'm being asked and I say, I'm sorry, I saw my therapist last week and I think I need a day off, the first reaction would be, are you mad? Because the average Ghanaian will first of all ask, are you mad? Because we feel that the people on the streets are mad people. Like a lay person can call them mad person, but it is against my ethical code to call them mad people. They are rather people suffering from schizophrenia, or in short, SZ. That's how we call them. Yeah, so the reaction to how are you is normally where the stigma begins, because people are not used to mental health. Also, a lot of people who have come close to people living with any mental health disorder are, first of all, they lack awareness and understanding to what mental health disorder is. Secondly, either they feel reluctant or shameful about it to even say, I have a mother suffering from bipolar or depression. And then lastly, because of the stigma, some have lost a job, some have lost marriage proposals because of that same stigma. So in short, stigma goes a long way to your first response to how are you. And what I would say is, let's continue to answer in our best possible way how exactly you are feeling, because the stigma is just geared towards you not truly telling how you feel. So be able to stand up for yourself when you are being asked how you are doing, because in the Western countries, it's a luxury to say, oh, I'm seeing a psychologist. Yeah, last week I saw my psychologist. I explained about taking a trip to Dubai. I'm stressed about it. You see, so it's a luxury to have a psychologist. But here, or in the part of our world, we are not able to really share even the simple things that gets us stressed. And even stressing alone can cause a mental health disorder. It's not all the time I see clients who have really mental health disorders. Some are just impulsive reactions, like suicide. There's the mental health disorder that causes suicide. For example, depression can cause it, schizophrenia can cause it. And then the behavior that is an impulsive behavior can also cause suicide, whereby a heartbreak, a loss, maybe a business risk can also just cause someone to impulsively react by taking anything to, die and escape from their pain. So this, in short, I have to say about stigma.
Feeling the person has about himself or herself. And this time, the person is blaming himself or herself for the mental illness he or she is going through. So under the self-stigma, we have the alienation, and we also have the other one. So with social withdrawal. With alienation, you are blaming yourself for whatever is happening. You think you are the cause of your sickness. And then with social withdrawal, the person feels that he's not the same with others. Those I'm mingling with don't have mental illness. So the person tends to pull away from people who are not having the same situation he or she is having. So that's the classes of stigma that I can talk about. Thank you.
They've said everything when it comes to stigma and the definition, but basically what we mean by stigma is just basically the negative perceptions, beliefs, and attitudes that people have towards others who might not be in the same line or belief pattern or behave the same way they or belong to the same group as they belong. And so if someone basically is different, we might have perception about those people or have a belief about those people or behave or treat them differently, and those could be very negative. And then sometimes too, the individual can look and behave and treat themselves in a way that also isolates them or makes them feel different among people, especially when you have attempted suicide and you are not successful at it. There's a guilt that may come in. Sometimes even you can get as much as even the therapists or the healthcare providers who come around to even coach you through the way they will even say it and the way they will even go about it can even start making you feel so bad that you even attempted it. And I've seen similar cases at the hospital where maybe a nurse, a comment from a doctor or a nurse initiated the guilt process and made the person feel so bad for even attempting suicide. And so in such cases, if you don't meet that client at that point and help them through it, then that patient is going home with a cycle of depression which has started, which means that the risk or the chance of committing or executing the act again is very high. And so basically when we talk about stigma, is the way we treat people who have attempted suicide or who have even opened up about their suicidal urges and thoughts, the way we see them and the way we relate with them might have.
Why within our culture do we do that? Like, why do we shun suicide victims and their families, after they've committed the suicide? Why do we turn our backs on them?
I think it's multiple factors here in Africa and in Ghana and other cultures. The one, you look at it from an express emotion because there are emotions we expect you to express and there are emotions we don't expect you to express. It's just like that in the home. If you can't cry, it's just like that. If they have not beaten you and you cry, you have to be beaten again for crying. And we just have certain kinds of emotion we expect to show and certain emotions we don't expect. So, and then because of our interconnectedness, if you attempt suicide, it feels like a disgrace to the entire family, And so the family derives meaning from your behaviors and action outside. Your personal life is still tied into the family's principles and values, and they hold it so dear to their. So sometimes, if you're going through difficult times and suicide becomes the option, and you attempt it, to the family you've disgraced them. To the family, that is not the type of person they have. That's not their trait. It's not one of the family's standards, and so they might treat you like an outcast for bringing quote unquote shame to the family and all of those. Then again, I said expressing strong emotions and especially negative emotions is seen as weakness, and you are not strong, you are not matured, you are not. All kinds of terms which are quote unquote have stigma related to it is ascribed to those. So it also inhibits and affects how we treat people who attempt suicide. So there are cultural sides.
So what about the church? Like, should the church be more educated in
knowing that mental health has something to do with behavior. Can I say behavior? Rather than, I guess, the spiritual side of it.
So I think the church needs education, and it's not just the church. So education on mental health is still on the low side. That is why when sometimes as human beings we are weak, we fail to admit that at this point I'm weak. And when you are at your wit's end and you need help, it doesn't make you a failure. So it is better we educate our churches and even everybody in the society so that we don't see somebody suffering from mental health as being some way, then we bring in the stigma. So I think education is key. And to be very honest, once somebody thinks about suicide, then stigma comes in. So suicide and stigma can't be separated. But we should know that when we stigmatize people, then suicide is on the high side. So once we let people stop stigmatizing others, then we can make it. We know that you need me, I need you. There is no need to point fingers and all that. Then we can help each other. That's the little I have to say.
Okay, so I would say there's just a thin line between spirituality and psychology. The two work best when we are able to be balanced, all right? But unfortunately, in our part of the world, it isn't so. The self-acceptance is still a big problem, even in our church, even we ourselves, right? The family can quite relate with, she has malaria, all right? And let's go to the hospital or let's go to the drugstore. But because of the lack of awareness, it's strange. You know, even the prehistoric times, the Socrates, they were using all kinds of means to treat health, right? It was bizarre how they would, if you were having a headache, they would just cut your skull open to do some stuff. If you were healed, fine. If you were not, you were possessed. So it is carried from the prehistoric times into our time to accept that something strange isn't part of our culture. For example, we were being told to be afraid of the dark because the dark is what bad things happen. But these days, people get robbed in the daytime. All right, so we are coming to accept that, oh, in this 21st century, people can get robbed in the daytime. A lot of bad things happen in the daytime. So we are going through the same processes in understanding that mental health cuts across all regions, gender, demographic, psychology, biological, so when you're treating someone with any disorder, it's normally a multidisciplined aspect, right? So when the person, for example, a cancerous patient or someone living with cancer, right? The doctor sees him, the surgeon sees him, the psychologist sees him, and all kinds of other medical disciplines sees the person. And this makes health relatable. People are able to accept that, oh yes, I have cancer and this is how I can go about it. So we have family psychotherapy. We educate them. This is what is wrong with him. It is not spiritual. Now, if you want to try herbal, it's your choice. But a lot of times, people die, especially at the end stage of their cancer, even if they go for herbal medicine. So the first step is to accept it. I don't know what is happening. How can I know? How do I go from here? And so you ask questions, but the average Ghanaian don't even like asking questions, right? Even the caregivers who have patients in the hospital, when they come, they don't ask questions. I don't know whether they are scared of the doctors. They don't want to get to the flip side of the doctors. They are almost so careful that they don't know what their family member has. So you ask, what is the inside of his condition? I don't know. I just came to take care of him or her. So the attitude of asking questions, of wanting to know, of educating yourself, of being a leader in the family to accept what is happening to a brother or a sister creates a balanced line in spirituality and in psychology. Thank you.
Thank you. Sure.
Yes, and I think that also one layer that spirituality brings, especially many of our churches and religious fraternities is the fact that we pray against certain things, and so we are busy fasting and praying against certain. So it creates some kind of a delusion in our world, what we should expect and what we should not expect. And so when those things hit us, it's just difficult to come to terms. And I think that layer also makes it difficult that somebody who is very audacious, let me put it that way, very sanctimonious, of all accepting that a difficult thing can happen to them even after performing all of those spiritual exercises, one, accepting, and two, coming to having suicidal thoughts and urges. And it's not just even the people in church. If you come across practitioners, you will find that there's high suicide rate among mental health practitioners. And it's part of the reason that we also feel we know we have all the tips and everything to deal with. So there's a kind of delusion that we all create in our head that everything, like our world is the world, and so what is in our head is what is happening around and everybody and everywhere. But usually that's not the case, and so when the real reality hits us, then it makes it very, very difficult. So the prayers and other things also might be, though it's supposed to heal, sometimes it also brings another layer of suffering sometimes.
So what can we do in Africa or in Ghana to stop stigmatization when it comes to suicide?
So it's about educating people, letting them know that pointing fingers won't solve the problem, accepting them for whatever they are going through, and finding out how you can help them. If the person comes to tell you, I'm weak, today I can't think this way, what help can you offer to the person at that moment? You should be present with the person, making sure you are monitoring the person. Then at the right time, you can send the person to a therapist. But when the person comes to you with this and you say, oh, just go and pray, the person is vulnerable. So when the person comes, ask questions. So you make sure you monitor the person, and things that the person can use to harm himself or herself, you take it away. We can think of a lot of things, sharp objects and all that should be taken away. So you keep monitoring the person, then it will help. But if we don't do anything, we keep talking about it, stigmatizing people, then we have a lot of trouble. So that's what I think. Thank you.
Yeah, so there's a saying that you should look left and right. If you don't find anyone with a mental health disorder, it is you. So that you can have a feeling of being labeled. One time at the hospital, I was asking about the alcohol substance addicted patients for counseling. And for the first time, the nurses I went to ask didn't know me. So when I asked, please, what time do they meet? She says on Tuesday, but can I have your number? I said, okay. So I gave her my number. I wanted to see how she saved my name. She saved it Ophelia, alcohol patient. Yes. And I'm like, wow, alcohol patient, okay. And, you know, I felt a certain way because there were many sitting there. And I didn't know how to say, please, I'm not. But I was like, to be saying that would mean something else. So I just went home, and the next time they saw me, okay, so I was the one seated. They're like, oh, I said, please kindly change my name, okay? Kindly change my name. So that's it. To be labeled as in any name, right? To be labeled in any name which isn't positive doesn't sound well, no matter how you want to put it. That is why when people are in a relationships, you don't take it for granted when someone makes fun of you in public, even though you might not be how they described you, but it's unacceptable. It comes with disrespect and it comes with dishonoring, right? So first of all, I want us to make it our business, okay? Even though you might not be experiencing mental health disorder, but when you make it your business, you will have a different relationship with mental health. Why? because you would know that it's important that if you know what mental health disorder is, the person next to you, if that person has an anxiety attack or panic attack, you could calm the person down just by saying, you know what, don't worry, this has happened to me before, just sit down and then take some deep breath in and out, you'll be fine. So when you're going through something and someone tells you that, I understand what you're going through, it has ever happened to me before, then the person is able to trust you right there. Even if you're a stranger, the person instantly trusts you and listen to what you say and does exactly as you say it. Also, we have to educate ourselves about mental health disorder. It should be a priority to know about it, just like how we want to know about diabetes. It's like the average Ghanaian doesn't even care what they eat, how they eat, until they come to the hospital, which is also another negative behavior. Until we see a red flag, we don't rush to the hospital. We only wait when we are having shortness of breath and we feel, oh, is it BP? Let me go and try and do lab tests. And they find out that, okay, it's BP or it's diabetes. And they go like, hey, me diabetes, in my family we don't have it. I cast and I bind it in the name of Jesus. It's not about that. If we learn to educate ourselves about it, then we can prevent and avoid some of these circumstances. Third, I would also want to say, be compassionate. Be compassionate. It takes nothing for you to be kind. You are not too important to look at somebody and just be kind to them and just smile to them and be intentional when you ask someone, how are you doing? Look, if you're not intentional, don't just say hi, hello, bye, and you are gone. Like the white people, hi, hello, hi, and they are gone. They don't have time. But for the Ghanaian culture, even in the office, we relate like we know each other, right? So when you create that platform for the person to trust you, and you share food with them, your drinks, and one day they tell you what they are actually going through, and you turn your back and you betray them, you are shutting them off forever, which is no good. So let's try to have compassion with one another, be kind, let's empathize with them, and once in a while, just visit the Accra Psychiatry Hospital or Pantang Hospital. Just go and see the environment. It's not too bizarre like people out there say it is. It's not. There are people who come to see me just for insomnia. They cannot sleep at night, but when they see someone coming into the office with a label clinical psychologist, it's not nice. It's not everybody who sees a psychologist has a mental health disorder. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. She said a lot because I seem to relate with some of the things, especially at the hospital when patients come to see you and they live in your office and other people will be looking at them like, hey, I remember one time someone came, but are you sure this person has a mental illness? Like that kind of it. But those are some of the stigma that has been institutionalized. You get it? And so stigma is at different levels. And so if we want to deal with stigma, we have to look at it at those levels as well. We have those that are at the individual level, which we've talked about, the self-stigma, where people isolate themselves. People don't want to, they don't feel that they can fit in the society. They are looking down on themselves basically, and they do so many things to show that they don't value themselves much, or they don't see the value in themselves. That's self-stigma. And sometimes they can project it, and so they might think that other people don't like them or are against them, just to feel good about how they feel about themselves. Not necessarily the people are doing anything, but they try to highlight any red flag that shows that least thing, it's a big thing for them. Just maybe the people are not even aware of what they did. And so that's coming from an individual point. Then it comes to the community, the society, we friends and colleagues at work and all of those, we all have a role to play in how we receive our reception to people who are different, people who do not conform to what we quote and unquote expect from basically how we relate with them, people who are different, and so people who also do things differently or might not do things the way we want, especially people who have attempted suicide, the way, or people who have opened up about their suicidal ideas or intents. If we are more receptive and empathetic, we will be able to find a way to help them. We will be able to see their suffering from a point of view that will be more about providing help than actually labeling and criticizing them for feeling that way. That's at the community level. And then we have the institutional level, which requires decision makers to take certain decisions. For example, if you come to Ghana now, suicide is criminalized. It's in our criminal codes. So if I've had a case where someone has attempted suicide, and the case has been reported to the police. And so while I'm attending to the patient to get better, the police is also waiting to go and prosecute the person, to press charges. And so if you look at this kind of system, the next time the person will make sure they are successful because it won't help. And so that kind of systemic issues have to be addressed. It has to, and that one will require some level of advocacy, like organizations and individuals who are fighting to continue to fight, and people to support them to get that to that level where we have the laws that have changed. And even at the institutional level, in organizations have to change their policies and be able to accommodate people who have mental health challenges, to be able to open up. They can set up employee well-being programs within their organizations that will help take care of people who might have challenges like that. So in that way, we'll be gradually reducing stigma. Thank you.
All right, let's give them a round of applause. And now I'm opening the floor for questions. Okay. Suicide and grief. So, how do we deal with the aftermath of suicide?
Well, to answer that, we must understand what grief is. We learned a lot about suicide. So, grief is simply an intense sorrow that one experiences after losing a loved one or somebody. So, basically, that is grief. How to deal with it? As a counselor or a counseling psychologist, I don't like doing therapy on session, but I would like to explain that using what Kubler-Ross identified as the stages of grief. He mentioned 7 stages.
You know, it's 7 stages, so be brief about it.
I'll just mention them briefly.
Okay, great.
He talked about shock. When Prof was making his submission, he said, he touched my fellow panelists and said, if somebody comes for a session, we will be in shock. But this shock is not for the counselor or the psychologist. It is the relative or the friend who has lost the loved one. That person will be in shock. Then the other will be denial, then anger, then it talks about bargaining, guilt, depression, and then acceptance. So if it is not handled at the stage when the person is in shock, it will lead to the second stage where the person will be in denial. It follows that way. So I'd like my co-panelists to share their thoughts on that. Then I will come back and elaborate more on what we call complicated grief. Maybe they have something to say about that too. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So what I've realized is that grief in relation to suicide is quite different from grieving based on death through maybe death. What I'll call the normal death, the usual ones, and the atypical one being suicide. So for this stage, it usually breeds a lot of stigma, like we've already spoken about. And when I was speaking to Prof outside, he made a very important comment that I thought maybe he should have made over here. So we spoke a lot about how stigma is a bad thing, but stigma can it really be taken away? Because honestly, I'm trying to be very honestly, I don't think stigma can be completely taken away, right? But maybe our reaction.
What about when a baby is born? Because a baby doesn't know anything. So if we're able to teach a baby to not stigmatize, I think it can be taken away. But reality is, like you said, it probably can't be taken away because there's so many of us. So, but
Yes,
if we lived in a make-believe world and
then
we
that would
were
be perfect.
processed to not teach the baby about stigmatization, it would be possible, but we don't live in that kind of world.
Yes, okay. But briefly, what I'm saying is that when it comes to suicide, the grieving process is different because the families, especially for the families, they go through so much because the first thing that comes is blame game. Everyone keeps blaming each other, especially if you were quite harsh to the person who committed the act, or we are not supposed to use committed, but just for the sake of understanding, right? If you were not, if to your expectation, maybe you didn't do as much as you thought you could, and there's always a guilt that comes with those who are related to the person who died, and yes, there's that, and I think that's it even happens with all of us, not just the family, but because the family is much more closer, they experience it more. Because I see a lot of times on social media when someone passes and then people keep asking so many questions, so many existential questions. What could they have done better? And I guess we'll open it up to the panel and everybody else to talk about what we actually think we can do better for people who, or for families who have lost people through suicide, right? I feel this session shouldn't just be just us. Everybody should come in first to really get and understand. Because as a psychologist, I mean, I see people, but I think there's so much I'm limited to when it comes to this topic because I'm a research. I do a lot of research in depth, and it's way too complicated. And I feel people are even going to help us more than ourselves. I guess we'll get to know more as we go on.
There.
So, grief and suicide, it simply talks about how the family members or people known to the family relate to the fact that the person is no more, not by the natural cause of death, but just the thought that did he really take his own life? You know, so imagine you know me, about 50 people here, and I do this. Imagine all of you here thinking about it, my own family members. So there was a research that studied anytime a person dies through suicide, about 52 people are affected. The person's immediate family, the person's social platform, social media, church members, I mean, people they've lived in the same neighborhood with, and it really affects them deeper on that thought because they find it very difficult, especially suicide on intelligent kids. I remember when I was in school, as for me, I was an average student. When I get my 70, I'm so happy. My daddy would buy me popsicles. There were some, when they even get 99%, then they will cry and roll on the floor. That is what perfectionist. We call them the perfectionist children or adults, all right? You want everything to be black or white. You don't want any gray area, right? So anytime an intelligent kid, happens to die by suicide, like the parents can't fathom why. I loved him. I provided him with everything. Didn't he see that he was everything I had, But it's not the same way to the person who committed the suicide. And normally, a man who wrote The Suicidal Mind, he said that people normally commit suicide because of the unbearable pain So the question is the pain. And that suicidal thought is just a way of saying that, hear me, I want to be loved, I want to be understood, I want to be held, I want to be cuddled. So that is a way of passing an information that my need was not met. So instead of focusing so much about the event that took place, it's normally the unmet needs that we couldn't provide the person. Right, but however, because of our culture and understanding towards suicide, we grieve differently. So in short, that those are how people or family members grieve around people who have died through suicide.
So what are coping methods, and then how do they face the situation?
Okay, before that, let me speak slightly on grief. So when it comes to grief, I'll look at the neuropsychological bit of it. So let's relate the loss of someone to addiction. Right. So the person being present with us all the time is, let's say, our fix. Our loved ones are our fixes. Please, are we following? So when I say fix, I mean, let's say if it's a drug or a substance that keeps us active. Like that's what our loved ones represent. They bring us love, they bring us joy. And then once that is taken away, then we go into some sort of withdrawal symptom, right? So that is what grief is. That's how I've decided to explain grief. So that short period of not having, or short or long period of not having those people around, then, so when they're around, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, they're happy neurotransmitters, right? Those ones are always available. But once those people are taken away, those people that we term maybe our fixes, once they are taken away, there's a depletion in the brain pathway, and then there's like a withdrawal symptom where we begin to miss them, and then the anger and then the guilt and all those things come to play. So that's how grief works basically. So I guess that would be the next point to...
So how can a family member or a friend or just an individual cope with the loss or with grief after someone has committed suicide?
Okay, so one thing we tell our people here, which is wrong, is maybe, let's say, men don't cry. So typically, no matter the kind of death that happens, guys are not supposed to cry. They're supposed to be hard, or they're supposed to talk about against suicide, the fact that somebody has died by suicide. Now, we give a time period for people to be depressed, as it were, when it comes to grieving. So after the DSM criteria for normal mourning period, once it extends too long, once you are extremely sad and it's affecting your daily living for much more than necessary, then you need to speak to a therapist or somebody that you trust that you could unburden yourself to. That's one way of going about it. So speaking to somebody is always the best thing to do.
Well, I would like to add to what my friend just said. You first have to know what the person actually thinks of the dead relative or friend. Is the person blaming the dead friend by asking questions of why? Why did he do this? Why? And then the other one is the person blaming him or herself that, oh, is there something I could have done? Or are there red flags that I could have noticed but did not? So if you understand these two, then we can pick it from there and say, we will deal with that as it is. If it is you who is blaming yourself, then when you come for therapy, we will teach you all the coping mechanisms to deal with it as it is. If it is you who is asking why, then we now have to ask around that. Why did the person do this? Why do you think the person did this? Then we cannot give you the coping mechanisms. But there's a general coping mechanisms. Maybe my sister will talk about that.
All right. Okay. So one thing I've noticed about people over time, so the best way they can always cope is to know that their son was a human being who decided to do what at what time to cope, even though that was a maladaptive way of coping. That was wrong. So you help the individual to not go into depression. We have what we call the mourning stage, a healthy mourning stage for coping, where we teach you to mourn the dead person healthily. When you think about them, you think about the good times you shared with them, you think about what they have taught you, the impact they have made, how good they were, how nice they were. If they were doing something and they left over and you think you can continue that work, you go on ahead and do that. Some have also started foundation and organization or NGO to create awareness about suicide and raise funds to help deprived communities on how to stop another mother from experiencing what they experience. So some can cope by also feeling guilty and stopping that process from happening. So they take initiatives and they create awareness so that they can feel fulfilled and satisfied. Or some can also have a purpose of life or meaning of life. Maybe my son died so that I can take up this initiative to help somebody. So by doing that, they are able to cope.
So just on the last part, so that's actually the most ways people who have experienced grief through suicide cope, by joining other parents or helping other people who are suicidal. Just like the way, if you realize, for people with certain autoimmune diseases, that those communities, like, there are always people who have a first-hand experience, so they form an association. The same for suicide, they form groups and they help each other. I've realized that it's much more helpful than just going through it solo. So I think it's a very good point that she raised.
So I'm opening the floor for questions. Does anyone have a question regarding suicide and grief?
You can be prescribed a medication for your mental health condition. And as you are taking the medication, the side effects is suicidal ideations, thoughts, urges.
I quickly took the mic because my research was in aging. Yes, and I also have a very personal experience with the pensions that have been held. So there are some, they are really going through the classic depression stages. But because, unfortunately, the aged community are also not used to mental health, you don't know how to express it. And in the expressing it in more somatic ways than the normal depression. When I say somatic ways, I mean physical illnesses, headaches. So I know someone who, so for a while, so before the government changed their mind on the fact that they are going to exempt the pensioners, he was having pain on one half of his head. Right? And then so being a mental health person, I assumed that could be the cause. I spoke to him, he's like, oh, no, he doesn't even think about those things. Suddenly, the government says they're exempting pensions, and then his headache is gone. Right? And up to now, he still doesn't think that that's the reason why, but I just laugh over it. And then there are other people too that suddenly, now that the pensions are no longer going to be touched, they seem to be doing okay. Yeah, so I feel for the aged people, it will be easier for us to go to them than wait for them to come to us. So we should rather go, just have a chat with an elderly person. I like to do that just for the fun of it, because some of them are quite wise, right? So you go, just have a chat with them, and then whilst they help you, you help them ourselves. It's like a symbiotic relationship.
Okay, so in the world, the aged are the most populated group, and so anywhere you go, you will find an aged person, and suicide, unfortunately, is high in this age group, like 65, 80. Someone would ask, but you're already old, why are you rushing? But what they go through is depressing. For example, loneliness. Not every young adult wants to sit with a man who is slow at talking and, doesn't coordinate very well or disoriented. Not many young adults will do that. Secondly, the fact that the social support is not there, right? For example, the same age group, I know in my hometown, in Bolga like this, the pito is a base where they'll go and sit and drink and chew pork or dog meat. They tell their old soldier man stories and they get up and go. So there's at least support group for them. But in places where there are no support groups and some are just put into aged homes and they feel lonely, neglected, or, like taken for granted, it's a likely cause that they would one day think about suicide and even plan it. And research shows that an individual tries suicide 25 times before they are able to succeed, and they'll keep doing it until they succeed. And most of the times, old men use lethal means. Lethal means something that they can just get away with. And because they are old, people don't have time to observe them, so they'll take their time and plan it very well. If they have firearms, they'll use it. If they'll fall from the top of a building or do anything, they'll do it just because they want to escape what I said again, pain. And lastly, too, when they are going through what we call lack of self-sufficiency, you can imagine if I used to, old boy, if they used to tell you how they used to run girls, how they used to dress, and now they can't do all of that, even dress and putting on, their own dress, using the loo. So when they lack the ability to do that, it can also cause them to get depressed. So what I can say is that if you have old people at home, don't look at them and stare at them like they are weird people, because gradually we are all going exactly. So just spend a brief time. Sometimes when I do ward visits and I see old people, I just go and I chat with them and I just ask them stories about 1982, 1960s, and they'll talk, and we become friends. And I'm sure that I've done something positive in their lives. So let's be on the lookout for the old people, because they also matter. If they die, the funeral will be on us. So let's help them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just to add a little, it calls for us as a nation, as psychologists, as counselors, let's have programs for them. It's only December you hear that there's this party, the church is organizing program for the aged, and they'll give them fried rice, chicken, and all that. Let's make time for our mummies and daddies. Don't leave them to the hands of house help. Then me, my husband, my children, we are in one flat. At first, we had a compound house. Everybody is there. They are laughing. They are smiling. Now, they are caged in one. We are busy working, and they are somewhere. So at least once a week, twice, thrice, take them even out to a park somewhere, or give them their grandkids once, maybe the weekends, let them come and run in the home just to make noise and all that. If we can't have time to listen to the 1980 stories and all that, then we need to create people to be with them. There is a man, this retired professor we are taking care of. All his kids are outside. The woman is suffering from cancer. The man is also battling with another ailment. Now there's this young guy who is taking care of them. All his 4 kids are outside. They are nowhere to be found. So it's difficult. Maybe it's the way we create the home from beginning. How you bond with your children right from day one. That is why they may want to put you somewhere and live. But if we can train a family and have a home like that, then it's easier to have the kids around the parents. So let's create this programs for them, church programs. Give them assignment even to do. Give them something to do at the church, even visiting. When somebody is dead, call them, welfare group. Let them go and visit them. They will sit there the whole day. This one will come. They will tell them how this man died. Give them something to do. Don't think that they are too weak and frail and they can't do nothing. So that is what I want to add.
Okay, so to add about, talk about awareness creation. Because as we are here, I could see that today's program we have benefited from us. What about those outside? How can they also detect? How can they also know if someone is suicidal? So the awareness creation is very, very key. If you create the awareness, they will be able to know that, oh, this my grandpa is going through something like this. Can I get closer to him or her? If not, we talk about everything here, but those outside, because we are also lesser, comparing ourselves to the population, we are so less. What about those outside? So I think the awareness creation should be very key in fighting suicide in the elderly.
Sure.
Yes, so for all of us here, the Center for Aging Studies does a lot of programs with the aged. So if at the end of the program you are interested in maybe letting your parent or your grandparent sign up to any of their programs, you can see me, and then they will join. They have a lot of dance sessions, walks, and a lot of activities that they do for the aged.
Okay, any more questions? All right, so we're wrapping